Under the pale light of early November 2025, a new set of images began circulating quietly among observatories and research centers. They came from China's Tianwen-1 orbiter, still operating in the Martian orbit, long after its official mission had ended. The data, released without ceremony, showed an object that was not supposed to exist in that region of the sky. Labeled provisionally as 3I/Atlas, it appeared to be another interstellar visitor, but something about its form was profoundly wrong. At first glance, astronomers described a faint, elongated streak trailing across the red planet's background stars. But when image analysts enhanced the contrast, they saw what looked like a tail that pointed toward the sun, not away from it. An anti-tail, they called it, an optical illusion sometimes seen in comets, but never this large, never this structured. Within hours, research teams from NASA, ESA, and the Chinese National Space Administration had confirmed the geometry. The structure stretched for more than 200,000 kilometers, an immense arc of dust or ions defying solar radiation pressure. The discovery reached public channels 2 days later. News anchors struggled to explain what an anti-tail meant, showing simplified graphics while experts repeated that this was not a reason for alarm. Yet the tone in their voices betrayed unease. The object's brightness was increasing at an unnatural rate. Even accounting for its trajectory, which brought it close to the inner solar system, the reflected light did not behave as dust normally would. Some hypothesized that the composition was metallic, perhaps carbonaceous with high reflectivity. Others said that the data simply didn't fit any known model of cometary physics. By November 8, the Lowell Observatory in Arizona had gathered continuous spectral readings. The patterns revealed strange absorption lines inconsistent with water, carbon monoxide, or silicate dust, the usual signatures. Instead, there were narrow bands hinting at unknown compounds. One researcher privately told a colleague that it looked like processed material, not a natural surface. The message leaked on X the same evening, amplified by conspiracy channels that were quick to claim the object was artificial. Official statements followed immediately, denying the rumor but acknowledging unexplained spectral anomalies. In Washington, the news reached the White House Situation Room through a morning intelligence brief. President Trump, running once again for office and leading in several polls, publicly dismissed the event as another space media hoax, yet sources later confirmed that private meetings were held between NASA administrators and SpaceX engineers. Elon Musk, contacted directly by the European Space Agency, offered to assist with Starlink's deep space radar network. If this thing passes close enough, he was quoted as saying, "We'll have the first real-time radar tomography of an interstellar object." The plan was approved overnight. On November 10, SpaceX released fragments of data showing that 3I/Atlas was accelerating. Not dramatically, just enough to confuse orbital calculations. The deviation was small, but consistent. Astronomers debated non-gravitational effects like outgassing or solar wind pressure, yet no jets were observed. The object seemed inert, but still its path changed. The discrepancy accumulated hour by hour, forcing orbital models to be revised. If the trajectory continued bending at that rate, it would pass within 0.03 astronomical units of Earth, roughly 4.5 million kilometers, in less than 3 weeks. Across Europe, scientific agencies coordinated to verify the readings. The European Southern Observatory pointed its largest instrument, the Very Large Telescope in Chile, at the region of the sky near Mars' orbit. The resulting images confirmed the distortion of the object's coma, a vast, asymmetric plume extending in both directions like a glowing hourglass. The anti-tail was no longer an illusion, it was a structure, symmetrical and luminous, faintly pulsating in brightness every 7 hours. Panic began quietly on the internet. Amateur astronomers uploaded unfiltered frames showing a brilliant streak crossing constellations faster than orbital mechanics predicted. Within days, forums were filled with unverified videos of a second sun rising in the dawn sky. NASA, in a rare move, requested that the public refrain from speculative uploads until photometric data could be validated. The request was ignored. On November 12, a closed press conference was held at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Behind the scenes, teams from MIT, Caltech, and the European Space Operations Center were comparing datasets. The consensus was unsettling. 3I/Atlas wasn't shedding material like normal comets. Instead, it appeared to absorb radiation at certain frequencies, releasing it back as polarized light. The anti-tail was likely composed of charged dust aligned by an electromagnetic field, something unseen in natural interstellar objects. Theories multiplied. Some recalled the earlier interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, in 2017, and the second, Borisov, in 2019, both mysterious, both barely observed before they disappeared. But this time, the world had better tools, and the timing felt different. Economic instability, political turmoil, and environmental crises had already left humanity restless. Now the sky itself offered a new uncertainty. Financial markets reacted almost immediately. Shares of aerospace companies surged, while energy sectors wavered amid rumors of potential impact scenarios. The European Commission called for measured transparency, though leaked memos revealed contingency briefings for near-Earth objects. Musk, during a press appearance at Starbase, Texas, avoided direct speculation but admitted that SpaceX engineers were working around the clock to model any possible debris interactions. When asked whether 3I/Atlas could pose a threat to Earth, he paused before answering, "The math isn't final. Let's just say it's not impossible." Meanwhile, Chinese and Russian state media began presenting conflicting narratives. Chinese officials emphasized the scientific significance, framing it as a triumph of Tianwen-1's long-term surveillance capability. Russian commentators, however, hinted that Western agencies were hiding the full picture, suggesting that the object's approach was less accidental than portrayed. These claims circulated globally, blending fact and paranoia. By mid-November, the object's luminosity had increased by a factor of 20. Observatories in South Africa, Australia, and Chile confirmed that its albedo, the proportion of reflected light, was unnaturally high. For a comet nearing perihelion, such brightness implied rapid disintegration, yet the spectroscopic data showed no volatile emission. It wasn't evaporating. It was holding together, shining brighter as if converting solar energy into something else. Public broadcasts tried to restore calm. Astrophysicists explained that anti-tails sometimes appeared when particle orbits within a comet's dust plane became aligned with the observer's perspective. But behind closed doors, the language was different. Internal JPL memos, later obtained by journalists, described anomalous coherence in the dust plane, a phrase meaning that the particles weren't just aligned, they were synchronized. By November 17, the anti-tail extended across more than 6 degrees of sky, visible to the naked eye before dawn. Social networks were flooded with photographs. It hung above the horizon like a pale ribbon, unshaken by solar wind. Panic deepened when astronomers reported that radio telescopes had detected periodic fluctuations in the 8.4 GHz band, faint, regular pulses emanating from the same coordinates. NASA denied intentional signals, calling them instrumental interference, but the timing coincided exactly with the 7-hour brightness cycle already observed optically. The Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical institutions in the world, issued a rare statement urging reflection, not fear. But the line between science and faith had already blurred. Doomsday cults emerged online, promising salvation through alignment with the tail. Across the globe, cities began to experience unusual atmospheric scattering at twilight, as if the dust from 3I/Atlas were already diffusing through the upper layers of the atmosphere. On November 20, the European Space Agency published its final predictive model. The conclusion was grim but not catastrophic. The object would pass within 3.7 million kilometers of Earth, close enough for gravitational interaction, but not collision. Still, the uncertainty margin remained wide. Journalists pressed for answers, but the only statement repeated across agencies was the same: no direct threat to life on Earth has been confirmed. That night, a private research network led by astronomers from Harvard released new radar echoes from the Starlink array. The internal structure of 3I/Atlas, reconstructed from multiple angles, revealed a dense core roughly 2 kilometers across, surrounded by a halo of charged material. It wasn't spherical, it was flat, like a lens or shield. The finding reignited old debates about Oumuamua, whether nature could produce such geometry. The report was quickly taken offline, officially due to data processing inconsistencies. Then, on November 22, all deep space tracking signals from the region abruptly weakened. Radio observatories in California, Italy, and Australia simultaneously reported interference, a broad-spectrum noise resembling background static but pulsing at intervals of 7 hours. The anti-tail, visible now even from city centers, began to fade at its outer edges, as if retracting. Some interpreted this as the object turning, aligning itself with the Sun-Earth line. Governments tightened their information channels. Military satellites were temporarily retasked for sky observation. Anonymous sources within the Pentagon claimed that NORAD had activated contingency plans for orbital debris impact, though nothing was confirmed publicly. The silence of official agencies became the loudest sound of all. By November 25, 3I/Atlas was the brightest object in the morning sky after Venus. Its anti-tail now extended straight toward the Sun, a perfect linear beam. Observers noticed a distinct polarization pattern, invisible to the naked eye but captured by cameras, alternating dark and bright bands, like coded light. The effect persisted even when clouds passed. It was not a reflection. It was emission. On November 27, the Tianwen-1 orbiter transmitted its final batch of images before losing contact. The frames showed the comet's nucleus glowing with a steady, unnatural symmetry, no outgassing, no fragmentation, only silent motion through the void. Then, at 3:12 Universal Time Coordinated, all communication ceased. The Chinese government did not provide an explanation. Around the same time, global magnetometer arrays recorded subtle fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field. The shifts were small but synchronized with the comet's pulse cycle. Auroras intensified across latitudes where they were rarely seen: Italy, Texas, even northern India. The spectacle drew millions outside, watching a sky they could no longer understand. As November drew to an end, the world waited. The object was set to make its closest approach on December 2nd. News broadcasts filled with experts repeating rehearsed lines, politicians calling for unity, and billionaires promising private solutions. Musk tweeted that humanity was witnessing a test, not a threat. The European Space Agency prepared its last transmission schedule. In the early hours of November 30th, radio silence deepened. Observatories reported that the anti-tail had folded inward completely, leaving behind a single bright point that flickered once, then vanished from optical instruments. No debris, no residual trail. Only an afterimage in the magnetosphere, a faint, rhythmic echo that lasted for hours before fading into background noise. By dawn, astronomers had no coordinates left to observe. 3I/Atlas had disappeared as inexplicably as it had arrived. The final datasets remained incomplete, corrupted by interference. Theories multiplied once again: dust collapse, plasma discharge, instrumental error, but none satisfied the evidence. Weeks later, analysts discovered that one of the last radar reflections from the Starlink network contained an anomaly, a perfectly regular modulation embedded in the signal, resembling binary code. Whether it was compression noise or something else was never established. The file was archived, locked behind multiple agencies, and quietly forgotten as other crises took the world's attention. But for those who had watched the sky that November, the memory of that silent visitor remained. A shape with an impossible tail, a rhythm that defied physics, and a moment when humanity looked upward and, for the first time in decades, truly did not know what it was seeing. In the first week of December 2025, the skies above Earth turned unnaturally still. The absence of 3I/Atlas left an emptiness that felt physical, as though the heavens themselves had inhaled and refused to exhale. Night after night, telescopes scanned the sectors where the comet should have been, but nothing, not even a trace of ionized dust, remained. Scientists who had built entire careers on orbital mechanics found themselves facing equations that refused to balance. The official reports arriving from NASA, ESA, and the Chinese National Space Administration were cautious, phrased in neutral language. The object's optical disappearance, they wrote, may indicate a sudden disintegration event or loss of reflective material. But off-record discussions told a different story. The last telemetry from multiple observatories hinted that the object had not disintegrated, it had changed direction. At JPL, internal simulation teams replayed the trajectory data frame by frame. When they plotted the final vector, the numbers pointed to a near-perfect alignment with the Sun's ecliptic plane. Not toward Earth, not away from it, directly along the solar equator. The precision of the angle startled even the most skeptical analysts. Natural objects did not maneuver like that. Yet the idea of deliberate movement was unpublishable. To admit such a thing would collapse the fragile boundary between scientific uncertainty and human fear. Meanwhile, the magnetospheric disturbances continued. Satellite readings from NOAA and the European Space Weather Center showed a faint 7-hour oscillation persisting through the first half of December. It was subtle, just above the noise threshold, but steady, as if the pulse of 3I/Atlas still echoed through the solar wind. Some suggested it was merely a residual resonance, the solar equivalent of a sonic boom. Others whispered that it was a signal still repeating somewhere beyond the sun's glare. Governments maintained silence. In the United States, a classified memorandum circulated among senior defense officials. The document, later leaked to journalists, carried the subject line, "Electromagnetic Phenomena Following 3I/Atlas Transit." It noted a correlation between the fluctuations and transient communication blackouts across several Starlink satellites. The memo concluded that no hostile intent is evident, but that further monitoring is required to ensure no systemic interference with terrestrial or orbital systems. Elon Musk himself posted cryptically on X, saying only, "Not everything that leaves the solar system is gone." The post was deleted within minutes. Screenshots spread instantly. By mid-December, international agencies began restoring open data channels. Press releases framed the event as a reminder of cosmic unpredictability, focusing on the scientific legacy rather than the mystery. Public interest, briefly inflamed, began to fade. News cycles shifted toward political tensions in Eastern Europe and the continuing economic slowdown. The world, exhausted by uncertainty, was ready to move on. Yet in observatories and control rooms, a quiet unease persisted. The comet's apparent energy reflection ratio still defied explanation. Its non-gravitational acceleration, its symmetric antitail, the precise 7-hour pulse, none of it fit any known category. Papers were drafted, peer-reviewed, retracted, rewritten. Theories stretched to include exotic physics, electromagnetic dust confinement, solar resonance harmonics, even dark plasma phenomena. Nothing held. On December 18, the European Space Agency's tracking center in Darmstadt received an anomalous signal from a probe near the L1 point, a deep space weather satellite called SOHO. It was faint, buried in telemetry noise, but contained a narrowband modulation strikingly similar to the 3I/Atlas pulse pattern. The data packet was timestamped at 7:02 Universal Time Coordinated, exactly 7 hours after the last recorded magnetic oscillation. The sequence repeated once, then ceased. The following day, solar wind sensors registered a brief, coherent compression wave, a kind of electromagnetic heartbeat, propagating outward from the solar equator. The coincidence reignited speculation. Several astronomers privately described the event as a ghost echo, a lingering electromagnetic residue of whatever 3I/Atlas had been. Others proposed that the object might still exist, now hidden behind the sun, reflecting or refracting its energy in some unknown way. Publicly, none of these theories appeared in official statements. The narrative was kept simple: a comet, disintegrated near perihelion. End of story. But in private laboratories, fragments of data continued to circulate. At the Max Planck Institute for Solar System Research, a small team noticed that the periodic fluctuations were subtly altering the sun's corona density along the ecliptic plane. It was an effect too small to influence space weather forecasts, but unmistakable in the raw readings. Something was periodically disturbing the solar plasma, as if a vast, unseen object were still orbiting close to the solar surface, leaving invisible ripples behind. When this finding reached NASA through informal channels, senior officials quietly ordered a cross-analysis using Parker Solar Probe data. The results were classified almost immediately. Those involved in the comparison later admitted, under anonymity, that the data did not behave as expected. Outside the scientific community, cultural interpretations began to take hold. Documentaries, podcasts, and speculative essays flooded streaming platforms. Titles like The Visitor from Before the Sun and Echo of the Third Interstellar dominated recommendations. Some claimed 3I/Atlas was a fragment of an ancient stellar remnant, others framed it as evidence of engineered matter older than the solar system itself. Public fascination turned into myth. On December 24, as the northern hemisphere entered winter, a faint but measurable dimming of solar irradiance was detected, less than 0.02%, well within normal variation, but its timing was peculiar. The reduction occurred precisely at the expected 7-hour interval, matching the residual pulse that scientists had been monitoring since November. It lasted 20 seconds. Then everything returned to normal. Astronomers could not conclusively tie the two phenomena together, but the coincidence unsettled many. Quietly, JPL initiated a new internal study titled Solar Resonance Event 3I-25. The findings were never made public. In the final week of December, a small group of independent researchers in Chile using a private observatory detected a dim, moving infrared object emerging from behind the sun's limb. Its trajectory, while uncertain, suggested that it was leaving the inner solar system along a shallow outbound path. No tail, no coma, no emission, just a point of heat, receding into darkness. Its projected course intersected with the orbital path once occupied by 3I/Atlas. They submitted their findings to several major journals. None accepted the paper. Editors cited insufficient verification. Within days, the data files vanished from the observatory's public archive. By the close of 2025, the event that had consumed global attention for nearly a month was reduced to a handful of scientific footnotes and scattered online debates. The term antitail became shorthand for mysteries that defied explanation, a symbol of the boundary between understanding and awe. Still, somewhere in the background radiation, a faint rhythmic pulse persisted. It was weak, far below the level of practical detection, but instruments sensitive enough to capture it showed one undeniable pattern: every 7 hours, a slight shift in frequency, followed by silence. Most scientists dismissed it as coincidence. But for those who had watched the skies in that cold November, the feeling never left that something vast had passed through the heart of the solar system, leaving not destruction, but a question too large for language. By early January 2026, the world had already begun to forget. The news cycles turned their focus to politics, climate, and the upcoming Global Economic Summit. The comet, or whatever 3I/Atlas had been, slipped into the background noise of history, like so many unresolved anomalies before it. But inside the sealed corridors of several research agencies, data continued to flow quietly, analyzed by exhausted scientists who couldn't let it go. At NASA's Deep Space Network facility in Goldstone, California, a team of engineers detected a faint, repeating interference pattern while calibrating antennas for a Mars mission. The signal matched, down to the millisecond, the same 7-hour interval that had defined 3I/Atlas's final days. It was weak, far too weak to localize, but it wasn't random noise. The waveform carried an internal structure, a slow harmonic rise and fall that seemed intentional. They logged it, flagged it as residual interference, and moved on. Yet one of the technicians quietly copied the data packet and sent it to a physicist friend at Caltech. At the same time, the European Space Agency recorded something similar. The interference appeared intermittently in deep space telemetry, as if the signal were bouncing off an unseen medium between Earth and the Sun. It carried no message, no modulation, only rhythm. The agency's analysts tried filtering it out, assuming it to be internal crosstalk, but the frequency alignment was too precise. Some began to wonder if 3I/Atlas hadn't simply vanished, perhaps it had entered a state of invisibility, beyond optical and infrared detection, yet still present in the electromagnetic fabric of the solar system. Elon Musk's team at SpaceX noticed the anomalies too. Starlink satellites showed consistent low-level phase noise across multiple orbits. Engineers couldn't trace the source. The disturbances didn't correspond to solar weather, cosmic rays, or Earth-based emissions. After weeks of analysis, they discovered that the interference aligned spatially with the Sun-Earth line, the same vector along which 3I/Atlas had last been seen. Musk ordered silence on the matter. In internal messages later leaked to journalists, he wrote, "We're picking up the ghost of something. Don't make it a story." Meanwhile, in Beijing, the remnants of the Tianwen-1 mission control were quietly reactivated. Although the orbiter had gone silent weeks earlier, a partial backup system, one that had not been publicly disclosed, still transmitted low-band data packets. The telemetry contained unreadable fragments, corrupted by cosmic noise. Yet one fragment, buried within the data, contained a curious timestamp that matched Earth's rotation cycle to the second. It was as if something, or someone, had mirrored the planet's clock. Chinese scientists kept the discovery secret. Internally, they referred to it as Project Reflection. Their official report described it as data mirroring error, but those who worked on the project knew it wasn't. The timestamp sequence appeared and reappeared every 7 hours, consistent with the now familiar pulse. By mid-January, fragments of these events reached international intelligence agencies. A quiet coordination began between NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, and the CNSA under a neutral program name, Solar Anomaly Observation Task Force. Publicly, it was just another solar monitoring collaboration. Privately, it was an attempt to determine whether something massive, something still near the Sun, was influencing the field data of every major observatory. During one of these closed meetings, an analyst from MIT presented a visualization of the synchronized disturbances recorded across multiple satellites. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the anomalies formed a coherent pattern, a wavefront that seemed to orbit the Sun every 168 hours, or exactly 7 Earth days. The shape resembled a helix, like a slow, turning coil, moving with purpose. No one could explain how a natural object could produce such symmetry. In late January, the Vatican Observatory published a brief essay, translated into multiple languages, titled The Rhythm of the Unknown. It spoke cautiously about the humility required when facing patterns beyond comprehension. It did not mention 3I/Atlas by name, yet the timing was unmistakable. The text concluded with a single line, "Perhaps what we witnessed was not a visitor, but a reflection of what we have become, observed by the silence we refuse to understand." For the general public, these words meant little. By then, attention had drifted elsewhere. But among scientists, the unease deepened. A few privately questioned whether 3I/Atlas might have been more than a passing body, whether it could have been a system, a structure operating according to rules that humanity hadn't yet defined. February brought no new sightings. The Sun's magnetic activity increased sharply, masking most of the subtle electromagnetic traces. Instruments recorded more noise, more solar flares, more confusion. The recurring pulse weakened until it was nearly indistinguishable from background radiation. Officially, the anomaly was declared closed. Yet not everyone accepted that ending. At a small observatory in the Atacama Desert, a private group of astrophysicists continued tracking the solar interference manually. On February 9, they detected something extraordinary, a faint infrared echo from the outer solar system, moving slowly along the ecliptic plane. Its apparent trajectory matched, within margin of error, the outbound path that 3I/Atlas should have followed, but it was now far beyond Mars, heading toward the Kuiper belt. For 2 nights, they monitored it. The object emitted no light, no tail, no radiation, only heat, faint but structured. On the 3rd night, it faded completely. The final infrared frame captured before it vanished showed a diffuse halo of energy surrounding a dense central void. The data reached several universities under embargo. None dared to publish. The findings contradicted every known model of how a comet, interstellar or otherwise, could behave. Eventually, the files were stored, encrypted, and forgotten by everyone except those who had seen the images with their own eyes. By spring 2026, the world no longer spoke of 3I/Atlas. The headlines that once screamed about interstellar mysteries were replaced by politics, wars, and markets. Humanity had turned its gaze downward again, toward the noise of daily survival. But somewhere in the cold dark beyond Neptune, an unlit object drifted silently between frozen worlds. It neither decayed nor slowed. Every 7 hours, it released a faint pulse, a ripple of electromagnetic energy that spread outward like a whisper, vanishing into the black. If anyone had still been listening, they might have noticed that the timing of those pulses had changed. They no longer aligned with the rhythms of the sun. Now, the interval had shifted, subtly, precisely, to match the rotation of the Earth. And for the first time since its discovery, 3I/Atlas no longer appeared to be leaving. It was watching.